Well, as the tug-of-war continues on whether President Cyril Ramaphosa should step down or stay, concerns are being raised about how this will affect the country's image. Let's speak to Tshepo Matseba. He's Managing Director of Reputation First Group. Mr. Matseba, thank you very much for your time here on eNCA. Before I ask you about brand South Africa versus brand ANC and, of course, brand Ramaphosa, let me start with brand ANC. With the past few years having been such turmoil for this political party, do you think there's still a brand ANC to save?
Yes, absolutely. The brand called ANC, in its many characters and many contradictions, remains one of the biggest liberation movements in Africa, and particularly it remains the leading political party in South Africa, the governing party. So there is still a brand to save, but the characteristics of that brand is what is questionable. And one of the key things that you see when you look at projects such as state capture, you realize that at the core of state capture, the ownership of that entire process in terms of accountability belongs to the ANC. And so the ANC is always riddled with scandals, riddled with allegations of corruption, and that's because they are a ruling party. But they have not helped themselves because when you look at the character of the ANC, both at municipal level, provincial and national level, you find allegations of corruption year in, year out, if not week in, week out. Most recently, there was a fascinating story that we've seen that just defines who the ANC has become, where around 6 million was spent per kilometer to develop a road, a very, very small road in the Eastern Cape. And then, of course, the donkey carts in Northwest. Tells you just how much this brand has collapsed in terms of the promise it made to its members and to the citizens of South Africa before 1994, in 1994, and throughout the last almost three decades.
And Mr. Matseba, we all know that this particular issue, the Phala Phala report, is obviously going to be something that is a dent on brand Ramaphosa, brand ANC, but of course also brand South Africa. It doesn't matter if Parliament decides, for instance, next week, by virtue of numbers, that he doesn't have to go through an impeachment process. But the fact that there is an independent panel that found that he has a case to answer to, with all the evidence that he was given, which brand actually should the ANC be looking at saving at least?
Firstly, his brand is already tainted. It's not something that still happened. If you look at domestic sentiment, just around what South African citizens are saying on social media and what they are saying, what the headlines around the domestic and continental media, and then look at publications such as Bloomberg, New York Times, CNN. Internationally, you can tell that is his individual reputation is already tainted. Which brand should the ANC try to save? They should try to save the ANC first, because trying to save the country. Let's start with the ANC first. The ANC has its own problems that are causing South Africa problems. So the ANC needs to solve its own problems. I think South Africa has got instruments and entities that need to work on the brand called South Africa, because the ANC has failed so badly at managing its own reputation that you can't expect it to revive and protect a brand called South Africa. It's far too complex to protect South Africa. We have complex stakeholders like international investors around the world. Around the world, South Africans around the world, South Africans here at home, and the organization, the political organization, cannot help us solve that. That can only be resolved by the resolute of the structures that have been created, structures such as brand South Africa, the entities, structures such as the presidency, government communication and information system, SA tourism. Those are the instruments that we should look at to help safeguard the image of South Africa. Certainly not the ANC in its current form.
Yeah, well, will it help or will it worsen the situation if Ramaphosa resigns, for instance, especially considering that he will be the third South African president under the ANC who doesn't complete his term in office?
Well, it has become a culture, isn't it, in the ANC for leaders not to complete their term of office. It's become a pattern. In fact, you could almost label it the ANC of recalls, because if they disagree with you, they'll recall you. Sometimes they recall for the right reasons, which is perhaps somebody is embroiled in corruption or scandal. In this specific context, there is an investigation underway, and there are serious allegations leveled against the president. The best thing he can do for his own image and the image of the country, besides, before even talking about stepping aside or resignation, is to be upfront about what has transpired and provide leadership, because currently he's still the president of the country, and he owes the country at least that kind of protection, to say to the world that this is what has transpired and these are the plans that we have in the next 48 hours, in the next 2 weeks, in the next 3 weeks. The problem that we are having right now is that he has offered, mostly through his team and perhaps through his silence, he has offered very, very really obscure communication, and that creates very huge space for speculation, and we know what speculation does in an economy like South Africa.
And it leaves South Africans to making up their own conclusions, because they're trying to figure out exactly what happened. But Mr. Matseba, do you see any prospects for a quick recovery once these brands take a knock? That's brand South Africa, brand ANC, and brand Ramaphosa. Do you see any prospects of a quick recovery after this?
So South Africa can quickly recover, but it will take time for the country to recover from losing a president, if he does resign or if he's found to guilty for whatever reason and he has to step away from his leadership role. But organizations such as the ANC, they will recover at some point. He himself as an individual, he will recover at some point. But unfortunately, the kind of damage in terms of perception, because remember, perceptions drive markets, and the type of damage that this has done and that is currently doing will take a while to recover. This is not a project that's going to be rebuilt within the next 3 months or 12 months. It's going to take a long time, and people will keep referencing what has happened in the year 2020, and then what the outcome of that taking in November 2022 on the 30th or around this week of the 1st and 2nd of December. It reminds me of those days years ago when President Cyril Ramaphosa, the 8 days in September, as in September by Chikane, when he was referring to the departure of President Mbeki from the office. And remember, the interest in this is compounded by two significant things. The firstly is that we are going towards the national elections in 2024, and secondly that in 2 weeks' time we have an elective conference of the ANC at which a new leadership team is going to be elected. So this makes the decision about what to do far more complex than it seems. Absolutely. But at least what you require is confidence, and confidence means you are transparent and you tell the truth and you tell it from the first time. You don't issue chunks of versions. That only creates problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Tshepo Matseba, he's the Managing Director of Reputation Group First Group.